Mm-hmm. A ver.
On April 5th, 1911, 400,000 people lined the rain-drenched sidewalks of New York. As an empty horse-drawn hearse crept from the dank, narrow streets of the Lower East Side toward the skyscrapers towering over Madison Square. New Yorkers from all walks of life had come to pay tribute to the unidentified victims of the Triangle Fire, the deadliest workplace accident in the city's history. A few weeks earlier, the workers had been forgotten cogs in America's immense industrial machine. Now, 1 in 10 New Yorkers were there to claim them as their own.
Public conscience thought they had failed these young women. They had somehow not protected them.
There was a recognition, wait, these girls can't die in vain. That was said over and over and over again, as if the city had somehow turned its back on them.
If there weren't massive funerals, it would have been very easy for the city and the city officials to say, well, this is it's sort of a natural disaster, it's a terrible thing, but there's nothing anyone can do about it.
If you ask the average American, is it okay for workers to work in a shop where the conditions are so dangerous that it could cost them their lives and not have government intervene, most people would say no. There's a line. The Triangle Fire drew that line. It burned that line, really, into the nation's conscience.
Every morning, 6 days a week, more than 100,000 people poured out onto the streets of the Lower East Side, headed toward another day's work in the city's garment factory. Many were young women in their teens. Some were girls as young as 10. They were immigrants, Italians who had fled natural disaster, Jews who had escaped persecution in Russia, Ukraine, Poland. Their families had chosen America for its promise of a better future. But even the youngest daughters had come to understand that their precarious hold on the American dream depended on their willingness to work.
Father had to take me to the shop and not be late for his own work. I was eager to begin life on my own responsibility, but was also afraid. Don't look so frightened, he said.
These young girls weren't just earning money for their own clothes or to, go out to the dance hall or to Coney Island. They were earning money to support the family.
Economic security was the American dream for many of them. Making enough money to be able to put food on the table, not worry about making rent for the week.
much more modern factory environment. High ceilings, big windows, compared to the coal stove heated, dusty, hugely crowded sweatshop rooms. Triangle was a plum.
But even at the Triangle, sewing machine operators faced a 14-hour workday for $2 a day at most. And that was before bosses docked their pay for the needles, the thread, the electricity they used.
Sometimes you work at a big machine, and it's not working right. One of the needles skips. You get blamed for mistakes. The same machines, the same surroundings. Shirt waists, and more shirt waists.
On the 10th floor, the Triangle owners could feel their vast machine shuddering below. Max Blank and Isaac Harris had made Triangle a $1 million a year behemoth, mass-producing the garment every modern woman must have, the shirtwaist. Harris and Blank were known as the Shirtwaist Kings, but their empire, as they saw it, was under constant siege. After 20 years, the shirtwaist was getting stale. Fashion editors began to showcase colorful dresses for the modern woman and turned up their noses at the bourgeois waist. No matter how much silk embroidery Harris added to their designs, the Triangle sales charts sloped down. Material and shipping costs seem always to be rising. Profit margins matched this year's fashion easily sheer.
For Max and Isaac, there was this constant awareness that they were, as successful and as rich as they were one bad season away from being broke. The competition
had just come into use, and you rarely heard the foreman sneak up behind you, watching.
He wouldn't let you stop. Not for a drink, the bathroom, nothing. Sometimes, in my haste, I get my finger caught and the needle goes right through. I bind the finger up with a piece of cotton and go on working.
exercise of individual freedom. And that was the best thing for American society. That was the best thing for the economy.
The evidence abounded in New York. Private wealth was building the city's skyscrapers, its parks, museums, libraries, and hospitals. And the men who made it happen were celebrated.
These industrial buccaneers are lionized. There's this commitment in American culture to an extreme kind of individualism, that individuals, especially the owners of private property, should not be interfered with, that to interfere with them is to place inhibiting obstacles in their path that will restrain prosperity and industrial growth.
I think a lot of industrialists saw themselves as fairly benevolent, as providing jobs, as providing the means of survival to hundreds and sometimes thousands of workers. And if workers complained about their wages, complained about their hours or the conditions under which they worked, they were biting the hand that fed them.
Progressive reformers have been shining a light on the growing inequalities in America for 20 years. The crushing poverty, cramped living spaces, and inhumane working conditions. But their calls for government to rebalance the relationship between employers and their employees went largely unheeded. What elected official wanted to put the brakes on the country's remarkable economic engine? Picketers at the Triangle knew that if they wanted their bosses to treat them fairly, they'd have to force the change themselves.
Winning a union in the shop means establishing a contractual relationship with the boss that covers all the workers in that shop with respect to not only the wages they work for, the hours that they work, but the conditions under which they work, and that their bosses no longer be allowed to get away with what they've been getting away with.
Max Planck and Isaac Harris weren't going to let a bunch of disgruntled factory girls tell them how to run their company. The Triangle